The night was wrapped in an unsettling darkness. No moon could be seen in the sky, only a handful of pale stars blinking weakly as if they too were afraid to shine. Around the village, a dense forest stood like a wall of shadows. Its trees were so tall and thick that even in daylight the sun could barely break through. On this night, the forest seemed alive. Branches swayed without wind, and every rustle of leaves carried a hidden warning. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant cry of a wolf. At the edge of the village stood an old, abandoned house. It had broken windows, a door that hung loosely on rusted hinges, and walls covered with cracks. People rarely dared to go near it, for they believed it to be cursed. Yet inside, a child lived. No one knew his name or where he had come from. Some said he had appeared suddenly one stormy night. Others believed he had always been there, waiting in the shadows. The villagers called him the Forgotten Child. Unlike other children, he never played, laughed, or spoke much. His face was pale, his eyes dark and hollow, and he wandered the village outskirts as if he did not belong to this world. Whenever someone tried to talk to him, he would simply stare back, silent and cold, until the person looked away in fear. Strange things had begun happening ever since the child appeared. Cattle disappeared, doors were marked with strange stains, and eerie screams were heard from the forest at midnight. Though no one had proof, the villagers whispered that the child was at the center of it all. And so, on this moonless night, the village lay restless, shivering under the shadow of both the forest and the child who seemed to carry darkness with him. At first, the villagers tried to ignore the strange child. They told themselves he was just an orphan, a lonely boy who had lost his way. But as days passed, unease spread through the village like a slow-moving poison. It began with small, almost unnoticeable events. A goat would vanish overnight, the tracks leading into the forest but never returning. Then one morning, a farmer discovered his barn door splattered with dark stains that looked horribly like blood. Before long, the incidents grew more disturbing. In the middle of the night, villagers were awakened by distant screams echoing through the forest, screams so piercing and unnatural that even the bravest men shuddered beneath their blankets. Children cried, mothers clutched them close, and no one dared step outside to investigate. It was easier, safer, to whisper in the dark than to confront what might be lurking there. Gradually, all the whispers circled back to the same source, the boy. He never laughed, never played, never joined the other children. Instead, he wandered the edges of the forest with an eerie stillness, his hollow eyes following people silently as they passed. Women fetching water from the well would freeze when they saw him nearby. They would lower their gaze quickly, muttering prayers under their breath, and hurry home with pounding hearts. The village elders, too, were unsettled. They said the boy's sudden appearance was no coincidence. Some claimed he was the child of a curse, born from the shadows of the forest itself. Others whispered that he was not human at all, but a spirit wearing the disguise of a child. Rumors grew wilder. When he smiled, lamps flickered out. When he stared too long, the wind shifted suddenly, cold and sharp. By the second week, fear ruled the village. People locked their doors tightly before dusk. No one dared mention the boy's name aloud, as if speaking it might summon disaster. Yet in every household, the same silent thought lingered. How long can we live? Can we live with such a child among us? For weeks the villagers had lived under a cloud of dread, each day heavier than the last. They spoke in whispers, avoided the forest, and locked themselves indoors before sunset. Everyone knew something had to be done about the strange child, yet no one was brave enough to face him. It was in this fearful silence that an outsider appeared. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to have seen too many dark things. A bow rested across his back, and a sharp hunting knife hung at his side. His clothes were rough and torn, but he walked with the confidence of someone who belonged more to the wilderness than to any village. At once, the people recognized him for what he was, a hunter. At first, the villagers kept their distance. They watched him from behind half-closed doors and narrow windows. Finally, one of the elders stepped forward and asked cautiously, "Stranger, what brings you to our village?" The hunter's voice was deep and steady as he replied, "I have heard of a child who lives here, one who is not what he seems. Where he walks, Darkness follows. I have come to find him. A wave of unease swept through the crowd. Some faces lit with hope, others darkened with doubt. Could this man truly face what none of them dared to? Was it possible that steel and arrows could protect them from a curse? Seeing their hesitation, the hunter's gaze hardened. I can see fear written on all your faces, he said. But hiding in your homes will not save you. Fear must be hunted, not obeyed. I will seek this child, and when I find him, the truth of your nightmares will be revealed. From a distance, I watched silently. My heart pounded with curiosity and dread. Something told me that the hunter's arrival would not free us. It would only lead us closer to a truth we were never meant to uncover. That night, the hunter prepared himself and set out toward the forest. He carried only a flickering torch in one hand and his bow in the other. The villagers stayed behind, whispering prayers and locking their doors, but I could not resist following him. Curiosity burned inside me stronger than fear. Keeping to the shadows, I trailed after him, careful not to make a sound. I spy with my little eye, I whispered to myself, a nervous habit I had carried since childhood. And truly, everywhere I looked, something caught my eye. First, I noticed the hunter's heavy boots pressing into the damp soil, leaving deep footprints that almost seemed to glow faintly under the torchlight. Then I spied the branches above us, broken as if something far larger than a bird had forced its way through. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest became. The air grew colder, though there was no wind. I spied shapes in the shadows, long, shifting figures that moved when I blinked, but vanished when I looked directly at them. The silence was unnatural. Even the insects and owls had gone quiet, as though they too feared what lay ahead. Suddenly, I spied something on a nearby tree trunk, strange marks carved into the bark, forming symbols I could not understand. They glowed faintly, pulsing like the heartbeat of the forest itself. The hunter paused, staring at them, his jaw tightening. He muttered a prayer under his breath, though his voice trembled. I followed a few paces behind, spying every detail, my fear rising with each step. I spied the hunter's hand tightening around his bow. I spied his torchlight flickering wildly, as though it too was afraid. And in the distance, I spied something else, two small points of red, glowing faintly between the trees, watching us without blinking. My breath caught. I knew, in that moment, the hunter was no longer stalking the child. The child was stalking him. At first, it was only a flicker in the darkness, two glowing specks hovering between the trees. The hunter lifted his torch, the trembling light spilling across the forest floor. And then we saw him. The child stood there in complete stillness, his small frame half hidden by the shadows. For a moment, he looked almost ordinary, like any boy you might pass on the street. But then his eyes caught the light, and they were not the eyes of a child at all. They glowed a deep, burning red, like embers buried in ash. The hunter froze. His grip tightened around the bowstring, though I could see sweat glistening on his brow. He had faced wild beasts, perhaps even monsters, but nothing could prepare him for this boy's gaze. The child tilted his head slightly, as though amused. His lips curved into a slow, unnatural smile. It wasn't the smile of innocence. It was the smile of someone who already knew the outcome of the hunt. The air around us shifted. I felt it pressing on my chest, heavy and suffocating. The torchlight sputtered, threatening to die. The boy stepped forward, one deliberate pace at a time. His bare feet made no sound against the forest floor, as if the ground itself dared not resist him. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt locked in place. The hunter finally shouted, raising his bow, "Stay back." His voice cracked, betraying his fear. The boy only laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that rattled the trees. With that laugh, the forest seemed to come alive. Shadows stretched, branches bent, and the symbols carved into the trunks began to glow more brightly. In that moment, I realized the villagers were wrong. This child was not cursed. He was the curse itself, wrapped in the fragile shell of a boy. The hunter wasted no more time. With a sharp cry, he loosed an arrow straight at the child's chest. For an instant, it cut through the darkness like a streak of fire. But just as it neared its mark, the arrow disintegrated, burning away into ash before it could touch him. The boy didn't even flinch. His red eyes glowed brighter, and that dreadful smile widened. Frustrated, the hunter fired again, arrow after arrow, but each one met the same fate. bursting into flames, crumbling to dust, or twisting in the air before it could strike. The forest echoed with the hiss of destroyed arrows and the mocking sound of the boy's laughter. Then, with a sudden movement, the child raised his hand. The torch in the hunter's grip sputtered violently before being snuffed out, plunging us into near-total darkness. Only the boy's glowing eyes remained, floating in the shadows like a predator's. The hunter cursed under his breath and drew his knife, its blade reflecting what little light remained. But the boy was faster than any human I could follow. He darted forward, not running but almost gliding across the ground, silent and swift. The hunter swung his knife, missing by inches as the child appeared behind him. A piercing shriek filled the air, not from the boy, but from the forest itself, as though every tree and every shadow had joined the battle on his side. The ground shook beneath our feet. Branches lashed like whips, tearing at the hunter's arms and face. He fought desperately, slashing at the shadows, trying to keep the boy in sight. But every time he turned, the child was somewhere else, laughing, whispering, circling like a wolf around wounded prey. I watched in horror, realizing that this was no battle between man and child. It was a struggle between mortal flesh and something ancient, something that could never truly be killed. And the hunter, no matter his skill, was already losing. The battle could not last much longer. The hunter's breaths grew ragged, his knife arm trembling from exhaustion. His once sharp eyes, now filled with desperation, darted wildly through the shadows as he tried to keep track of the child. But the boy was everywhere, his laughter weaving through the trees, his glowing eyes flashing in the dark, his presence pressing down like an invisible weight. At last, the hunter stumbled. A twisted root caught his boot, and he fell hard onto the forest floor. His knife skidded away into the darkness. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, slowly, the child stepped forward, his red eyes fixed on his fallen prey. I wanted to call out, to beg for mercy, but no sound escaped my throat. My body was frozen, as though the forest itself demanded my silence. The hunter looked up at the boy, his chest heaving. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. The child tilted his head, that same chilling smile stretching across his pale face. He didn't answer in words. Instead, he raised one small hand. The air grew icy cold, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath us. A shriek tore through the forest as the hunter's scream merged with the cry of the trees. His body convulsed once, and then went still. The boy stood over him, triumphant, as the last ember of torchlight faded into blackness. Then, without a sound, he turned and melted back into the forest shadows. Within moments, he was gone. The hunter was never seen again. His weapons, his body, nothing remained. And the child, too, vanished into the darkness that night, leaving the village in a silence far more terrifying than screams. Even now, when the wind howls through the trees at midnight, villagers swear they hear it. The echo of the hunter's final cry, and the soft, haunting laughter of the forgotten child who still roams the forest, waiting for his next prey.